afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propaganda Fields with me, your host, Imperial Dane. We're off here to have a look at Kholodny Ferma. Yes, indeed, Kholodny Ferma. With a classic 1 versus 1 map in Kholodny 2 where a lot of fights tend to happen. It has a rather spectacularly interesting nature there. Of course, we do have the central victory point here, which is where most of the fighting tends to happen. It is very much the shortest point between the two bases. Another sort of point where tends to be a lot of fighting is around here. Also note, this map has seen some few changes. In particular, this area has sort of been cleared up for infantry to use, so that's a little added detail. Otherwise, I mean, there are some things to sort of note in terms of cut-off points. These two, due to the proximity to the fuel points, are, well, rather contested. But this one in particular, this one due to sort of the terrain being sort of slightly more different and the flow of the map overall. I mean, if you sort of note here, the road pretty much goes straight past this one, whereas this one, you know, it's a bit further away from it, it's a bit more isolated, and that mentally also forces some players to not really focus so much on it compared to here. Plus, there's a building sort of right around here. Generally, most of the fighting tends to happen around here in this small sort of compartment, and generally meaning if you can hold here, I mean, nothing really happens here, whereas here, you know, you'll generally always be on a sort of threat of being harassed and cut off. So as the player right around here, you have to be a lot more cautious around it. You can try here, but again, if your opponent, who by the way I believe has a shorter distance reach to this building, I might be wrong here, gets before the first course, I mean, he can basically hold you up, so generally rushing for the northern part here is not necessarily so successful. So in that regard, you know, as a southern player, you have to be a lot more careful around here if you mind, as a but while something can genuinely do a bit of good. So that is something to sort of consider. I mean, not as much fun here, though it can be a bit more sort of vicious in some regards due to the sort of more narrow space and such. There's a lot of negative cover, so it's a bit trickier for infantry to sort of fight around in particular for the Wehrmacht, since they essentially lack any method of actually sort of creating cover for them. Though of course right here is, by the way, a great spot for mines, S-mines, other mines, basically good spot here due to the narrow space, and sort of basically you have a chance sort of catching up something overall. So this is really basically just mine crossroads basically. Also of course is right here, it's not uncommon to see someone hide over here while they're taking the point, so generally you might want to sort of lob over something if you have suspicion they're taking the point and you can't see them. Shoot here. It's generally a good spot. Also, it's one of the few spots where there is negative cover. Plus, that way, I mean, say someone moves in here, they can easily take a few good shots up close. It's a very fun move there. As well, so there's some details to keep in mind around the southern points. Always swing around here, such also good. And of course, this victory point does see some contesting. It has a slight tendency of sort of being forgotten. You can sort of sneak up here, you know, getting up here, crawling around the building. There's a slight bit of space there for infantry, so you can try that and sort of sneak up in case there's some MGs or likewise covering there. Good also spot here for mining, by the way. Here, not so much really sort of for mining though. This building, good for sort of quick infiltrations or say establishing a forward headquarters. These used actually be a sort of building you could use, but again, not quite much. Now it's a ruin, and this one overall, not so much as well. I mean, these two buildings, by the way, sort of strategic, but this one's actually a lot more viable due to the fact there's nothing covering its line of sight overall, meaning it can sort of dominate the center. Generally tends to be held by the Western player, so that's a little thing to keep in mind, though. It can be used quite successfully to harass the Western player by an aggressive player from the East, though you have to be a bit careful if you do decide to do so. Good spots for mining here. Here's a really good spot for mining, and around here as well. Here is basically also good. I mean, there's a lot of basic choke points around this map, and over all of these choke points basically are good spots for mining. So that's something very important to keep in mind. This is, I mean, basically a choke point is a sort of the map designer's way of telling, you know, hey, this is actually a pretty good spot for a mine. That's a sort of good rule of thumb. Well, maybe not. I mean, they might come out and say, well, you know, Dane, I actually designed this map, and I had no intention of implementing mines like that. You silly person. Though, of course, there's only one way of finding out. A bit about why in here, though, can also be good. I mean, say, for example, you do want to hold this as Western play. I mean, try to sort of fortify with a bit of again, preventing a direct rush. You could also just do a bit here and here. That's all. I mean, you can still sort of move around from here, but again, a basic direct rush at the building, whatever it has, is going to be a lot more difficult for your opponent. Not a lot tends to happen over here, but again, most of the fighting tends to sort of gravitate to the center or the north. South does also occasionally see center fighting, but generally south is sort of where most of the harassment happens. This is where small-scale actions will happen most of the time, though occasionally, I mean, if you do find the southern player here too bit digged up, it can try to launch a larger assault to completely push them out, so that's a little thing to keep in mind. But again, good spots for mining here and here as well. In particular, a bit worried about armoured assault. They might try from here. And also, good spot here as well. It's not too uncommon to see an armoured assault being launched from here. Rarely does it happen here, though. It is actually a good spot for maybe rushing into some armoured infantry. Not so much. Generally, machine guns or whatever base defences will cover this area. So that's a little thing to keep in mind as well. This building is, well, not really good for covering much, except actually annoying things down here, which generally tends to be the Western player uses this building more often. It's alright for heavy machine guns, though. This jet is mostly for infiltrators, or I suppose if you're being cheeky, a forward barracks. Good spot, by the way, also here, these two buildings for demo charges. Also, this church is a bit tricky in sort of regards. I mean, it more works for actually for harassing around here, but it doesn't actually sort of provide much of a stable point of defense due to the trees here. In fact, they block the line of sight overall, meaning this church's sort of covering point for here is much more limited. So that's a vital thing to keep in mind. It generally sort of works also for sort of pushing fact harassing here with a heavy machine gun. So a little detail to keep in mind in those regards. I mean, it's got plenty of windows here, of course, so that's something. Do also note this is actually, you know, there'll be infantry here, so this is actually a good spot to sort of aim your grenades for. In most cases, if you have infantry here, they'll likely hit something if their opponent doesn't move. Also slight shed here, again mostly for infiltrators basically. I mean, otherwise it won't really do much good. Small path by the way to also sneak around here. If you're cheeky, I suppose you could lay down some mines here to sort of cut this off. Also a good spot for sort of obfuscating maybe on mining as well. Barbed wire or tank traps, I've seen some players do that. That also tends to work. And of course we got this little particular spot here. It's rather unique. It's sort of not really part of any sort of, you know, optimal capping path. So, but you know, try to keep in mind it can provide you a bit of extra resources. But again, it does tend to be forgotten due to its rather awkward sort of part of the layout. It's basically a detour that costs you more time, if you will. So that's a little good something to keep in mind on top of everything. Beyond this, I mean, there's not a lot of sort of really keep in mind beyond that. I mean, good mining spots. The flow of the battle can also sort of generally tend you where sort of, you know, might want to sort of move your forces initially where you can sort of make some small moves for harassment or a bit of a quick coup de main and surprise your opponent. But again, you know, for a Eastern player, very much be careful around this spot. It will get harassed quite a bit. So keep that in mind very, very strongly. Again, this one won't see as much. It can happen, but generally, compared to here, where again also the terrain makes it a bit hard to sort of spot it. I mean, here, you know, you generally, depending how things go, you'll have a much clearer idea of when it happens. So a little thing to keep in mind. This building, by the way, also good for infantry due to the larger amount of windows, allowing for infantry to fire out quite nicely. And I think that largely covers Kholodny Ferma as it is. There's nothing sort of really beyond that to point out of this map beyond that. So I hope you enjoyed this Propaganda Fields. I hope it might strengthen you in your future fights on this map. If it did, feel free to subscribe, tell your friends, share with everybody. If not, you know, well, I'm quite sorry to hear that. This is Imperial Dane saying cheers and thank you all for watching.